The National Summit on Islamophobia has been running throughout this afternoon. It's a virtual event. We talked with Andrew Graham about it earlier on today, but specifically about the reaction from some local members of the Islamic community and what they hope to see come out of this summit. There is a very big pressing concern that it not just be more talk, that it has to actually result in some concrete actions. And as Andrew pointed out in the discussion earlier today, the individuals that he has spoken with even hearkened back to the list of recommendations that were released last week related to fighting back against Islamophobia. And some of these recommendations can be implemented almost immediately. It doesn't take a lot to start battling away at this. And so I think that's been one of the big messages that we've heard over this afternoon from individuals who are taking part in this summit. And joining us on the line right now to speak a little bit more about what has been heard and I guess the interpretation of what we're hearing is Fareed Khan, founder of Canadians United Against Hate. Fareed, thank you so much for taking time this afternoon to speak with me. I know that you've been glued to the summit. You've really been watching very closely what's going on. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you for having me on.
Anytime. Now, take me through, what's been happening in your mind throughout this afternoon, the discussions that you're hearing. You mentioned when we were chatting earlier today that there was also a roundtable that took place this afternoon. What's been your impression, I guess, of the things you've heard so far?
Well, I've been very impressed by some of the speakers from the Muslim community across Canada. There have been various stories, personal reflections, personal experiences, but there have been some very concrete demands. And one theme that has run through, or actually a couple of themes that have run through the entire day, is that, yes, we're tired of thoughts and prayers, and there better be something that comes out of this that's concrete. If this is a PR exercise, as one person put it, then there will be hell to pay. She didn't use those words, but that was essentially the gist of what she was saying. And the other theme that has run throughout the day that has been repeated by many speakers is for action by the federal government and federal political party leaders on Quebec's Bill 21, which is seen as state-sanctioned racism and Islamophobia. It targets, obviously, other racialized religious minorities, Sikhs and Jews, but the main target of that legislation has been Muslims, and this is one thing that the overwhelming majority of speakers have commented on, that there needs to be a reckoning about this state-sanctioned bigotry, religious bigotry.
Yeah, I remember hearing in some of the other news updates and tweets that I've seen discussion of that, and just in general government policies across the country that can lead to more instances of hatred and misunderstanding and perpetuating this type of mindset across the country. And it does require everybody to really take a close look at the more subtle things as well that take place. The bigger instances are easy to flag and point to. It's sometimes the subtle things that we need to get better at calling out.
Oh, definitely. I think, when we've spoken before, I've mentioned the fact that, we live in a country that was founded on racism. And the fact is that racism is ingrained into the institutions of this country and within government. And that is part of the problem that has fed Islamophobia. One of the speakers, actually a couple of the speakers, made very poignant comments about the fact that both liberal and conservative governments since 9/11 have seeded Islamophobia in this country through their policies, through their national security policies, through their anti-terrorism policies, through narratives, political narratives, and, that has been echoed by media across the country. And one very passionate young woman who spoke said that, when this government was elected in 2015, there was so much hope that we would have change after the years of the Stephen Harper government targeting Muslims. And basically, we've had only tinkering around the edges, but most of the problems are still there. And it took the murder of, not one, not two, but 11 Muslims in acts of hate over the course of 4 years for government to finally say we've got to do something about this. And that's unacceptable.
And I think, too, that as you've mentioned, the statistics about the individuals who have been murdered, my colleague Andrew Graham, he talked about the discussion of rates of Islamophobia and violence against Islamic members of the Islamic faith in Canada being among the highest in the G7 in the last number of years. And I think that is a slap in the face, a wake-up call for people who persist in saying, oh, that's not Canadian values, this doesn't happen here. It does happen here. The stats back it up.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think in the couple of days after the murder of the Afzal family in London, political party leaders stood up in the House of Commons to talk about this. And the only person who got it right, in my view, is Jagmeet Singh, who said, "This is Canada. This is a country where, anti-Muslim hate exists. It's a country where Muslims are living in fear, who were murdered just for walking on the street and for being who they are. This is Canada. And for people who say this is not our Canada, I think they have to really take another look. Because if these things are happening across the country, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Indigenous racism, whether it's anti-Black racism or any other type of hate, people need to look at it and say, is this the country we want? Because the thing about people who commit acts of hate of this nature, and especially violent acts of hate, is that it doesn't remain restricted to any one group. They target one group, and then they move on to the next group, and the next group, and so forth, until you have, basically anyone who looks different in any way from whatever the majority happens to be, or what they see as the majority is. Those people become targets. And one of the things that's coming out of this meeting is this urgent call that government, not just the federal government, but all governments, not only need to deal with Islamophobia, but we need to take urgent action, coordinated at the government level nationally, to tackle hate and white supremacy in this country, because it has exploded over the last number of years. And one of the big issues that's been brought up by a number of speakers is the fact that how social media companies and, web hosting companies have contributed to this. They profit off this hate, but they are not being held accountable or responsible. And there needs to be some sort of regulation of social media companies in order to address the spread of hate.
I think that these conversations are going to continue, but again, to circle back to that need for action. So we've had the summit. It wraps up at around, 7 o'clock tonight. What comes next? What kind of a timeline would you ideally like to see, Fareed, in terms of starting to put some concrete actions in place?
Well, the deadline to make submissions to the minister's office in relation to this is the end of August, so I'm not sure that we're going to see any report come out of this. There have been a number of recommendations that have been made. As I said, one of the ones is to deal with Bill 21. Unfortunately, the Minister of Justice, who was sitting in on the meeting, and when he heard that, his response is, we're following this closely, and that's not what those who were sitting in on this meeting were calling for. They want action. They don't want the government to sit there and observe. There were mentions about calling for an amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act. There was a section called Section 13, which was a hate speech provision, which was removed by the Harper government under the guise of protecting freedom of speech. And there have been calls, not just today, but for the last number of years, to reinstate that section. And I don't know why the government didn't do that. They could have easily done that, because they would have had support from the NDP to get that done. Not only that, there have been calls for the government to fulfill its responsibility in upholding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and defend the rights of Canadians when they are targeted by hate by other levels of government. And I think this goes back to the not just to the Bill 21 issue in Quebec, but also a bill that was introduced by the Alberta government relating to prosecuting protesters in different sorts. The social media aspect aspect of it, of course, has been a key issue. And one of the things that I put into through the Canadians United Against Hate, put into recommendations to the minister, is that federal government agencies, boards, and commissions reflect the diversity of Canada, because that's one way that the government can set an example to say, here at the federal government level, we are going to reflect Canadian diversity in those bodies that we appoint decision makers to.
A lot that can be done, and a lot of, just common sense things that we're talking about here. And I'm glad that, there are so many things ahead of us that people are talking about, as you've outlined here, Fareed, a lot of action items. And I know that all eyes are on this. And as you paraphrased the speaker from earlier, saying that if nothing comes of this, there is going to be an uproar over it. And so I hope that pressure keeps on our governments at all levels, and we'll keep talking about the latest developments when it comes to this. So thank you so much for your time today, Fareed. As always, very much appreciate the time and effort that goes into having these conversations. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me back again. I'm sure that some of these issues are going to be key issues in the expected election. So hopefully we'll have, some election-related discussions around these issues.
100%. You can't see me right now, but I'm nodding my head. So
okay, thanks a lot.
Take good care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. That's Fareed Khan, founder of Canadians United Against Hate, speaking about today's national summit on Islamophobia. And this, again, virtual event, it's been ongoing throughout the day. And Fareed has been watching very closely and shared with us quite a lot of what the discussion has been focused on in the last number of hours, and what he would like to see moving forward, and where that focus should be on. So my thanks again to Fareed for his time.